Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 44 of Syncing with ServiceNow. I'm your host today, Andy Whiteside. Excited to be back. It's been a little while. We got a good topic around multi-factor authentication, which, ties into everything. I've got Mike Sabia with me. Mike is our master architect on the ServiceNow side. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Andy.
We haven't spoke much lately. You guys have been busy. What's the most exciting thing you're working on?
Most exciting thing for us is we just redid our ServiceNow instance. We're eating our own dog food. We're intimately using ServiceNow. We had a domain separated instance for our MSP business, and we've been utilizing a new stand-up of ServiceNow for our ServiceNow business, but now bringing the MSP team over. There's a lot of advantages with, well, first of all, getting away from domain separation in order to best support those MSP customers, but also we are using HR service delivery, which doesn't work on domain sep because how it's licensed. So a lot of good things happening.
I'm sorry. Did you say we were drinking our own champagne? Is that what you said?
Drinking our own champagne. Yes, that's exactly what I said, Andy.
But I love saying it both ways because it's important that we do that. And a company our size using it on the HRSD is just unheard of, but very applicable. Sorry, I got a cough going on. Amazing time. Fred Reynolds, how's it going?
It's going wonderful, man. Excited. Glad to be back doing some of these. Had a couple of eventful weeks, a lot of customer interactions and out and about talking to people. So it's very exciting to see how people are using it. Yeah, don't die. Looking at you coughing right there, Andy. I had one of those weekends too. So I think I caught that stomach virus that was going around. So a lot of sickness going around.
Yeah, I just had this persistent cough for a little bit. Not normally so bad that I have to cough during a podcast, but hey, timing is everything.
Get some water.
Um, Brett, you may have said this and I didn't catch it. What's the most exciting thing that you're working on these days?
Like Mike, it's exciting to see that we're using more of the platform internally, seeing how we're using it HRSD. But again, what's really exciting is we're starting to help more and more customers as a business unit, as XenTegra. I think it's really nice to see that I get calls multiple times a week from customers saying, "Hey, we want to do more, need to learn about more." So I'm really enjoying that, Andy. It takes a while to keep building this up. Our team keeps growing. Our work keeps becoming more evolved and learning as we learn with our customers. So everything's exciting. More and more events are happening. Had 3 events down in Florida last week. Got a ServiceNow Summit coming to Charlotte next week and happy hour with that. So meeting a lot of people, having a lot of good conversations.
Yeah, we're still doing what we do and it's working.
You know what? The customers are really appreciating it, Andy. I mean, I can't tell you how many customers came up and commented the fact that they love how we do this. And several new customers came to my meetup in Raleigh that never met before, was kind of what's the catch coming to our events. I said, there's no catch. We're trying to build a community. We're trying to build relationships. We're just trying to connect you with our vendors and connect you with partners and customers. And so it's good to see that, but we still do that.
And then we do this podcast every other week or so. And, it's what I call content with context. It's just another thing we do to kind of give. And, if people want to come work with us, great. If they want to just listen to this and learn and have some talking points on their side, even other partners, like occasionally I get a message from another partner that listens to these things and we don't care. Like we just do what we do.
Yep.
And along that line, we know there's a lot of customers out there working with an existing ServiceNow partner or directly with ServiceNow or both. And if you're not feeling the love and feeling like you're being treated like a partner, as a client partner is what I call them, what I like to call client for life opportunities, then let us know. And we would love to kind of get you in the mix. Fred, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I asked you this question probably 3 or 4 months ago, and I said, to date, have you lost the client? What's the answer as of today?
We still have not lost a client.
Mhm. Things happen and companies get bought and they have to move on to different products. But as far as people who've stayed on the ServiceNow platform, I'm not aware of anybody that's, gotten a hold of us and started working with us that's left us or ServiceNow unless there was some acquisition or something that happened.
Well, I think it's important, like you said, we like customers for life. We're going to work through goods and bads. We're going to work through everything, and it's about that relationship. So yes, we still have a perfect CSAT score, to be honest with you, Andy. So I think that's 2 years, 2.5 years into the making here. That's something that's pretty impeccable in my opinion.
So today's article blog that you guys brought forward is Enforced Multi-Factor Authentication, MFA, what you need to know. So I think, Mike, we're going to get into a little bit of technical here, but we're also going to
A little
talk
bit technical.
high level. Mike, you chose this blog. Why did you choose this blog?
Shake it up. We have some great topics about different products. We certainly see a lot of topics being brought up from ServiceNow around API, but sometimes you have to, be aware of some things that are happening with ServiceNow, some things that you need to be aware of when you're selling or using or endeavoring to best use ServiceNow in your organization.
Yeah. We if you talk about ServiceNow in the form of a help desk tool or ITSM, maybe that's one thing, and super important to protect that with multi-factor authentication. When you talk about ServiceNow the way we expect to use it, Fred, as a platform for running at least major aspects of your business, extremely important that we get the multi-factor piece in front of it.
100%. And I think what you'll find is not every customer is ready for that or in position to do it. They may have it, but again, it is something to go into, like Mike said, enforce. So before we jump into it, I think there's a date around it too, right? A certain release, Mike, that are going to enforce it. So customers will have to
Yes.
adapt.
Yep.
Oh,
And we'll get into that.
It's going to be required at some point then.
Yeah.
It's being required for internal users. It's not yet being required for external users.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to touch on something, and I was scanning the article earlier as we started to talk about it, and I wanted to make sure I brought something up, but I don't have to. It's actually in the very first sentence. Here it is. I'm excited to announce that with the upcoming new Now platform, Yokohama release, ServiceNow will be enforcing multi-factor authentication as a default security measure for all internal users who log on without single sign-on. I was going to bring up the single sign-on thing because so many people are confused. There is multi-factor. Multi-factor should be everywhere you go, but ideally you'd use multi-factor as a process to getting into a single sign-on environment. And then from there, your user has a nice efficient way to go do everything they need to do for a certain period of time before that time's out. But that whole multi-factor is part of a blended single sign-on approach. It's super important to me that people understand that those two things go together. It's not one or the other.
Yep.
Right. And if you already have that single sign-on or that MFA through your single sign-on, there's no need to do this additional MFA that ServiceNow is talking about in this article.
No one should ever access a SaaS platform without some type of single identity, single sign-on, SSO initiative happening prior to that access.
I would absolutely agree with anybody working within the system as a fulfiller. If you're a customer, that's a little fuzzier.
Yeah, absolutely, because you won't have that. You're not part of
You
that.
You could, but
not likely. It's not as normal because here's the question. Like, I'm a consumer of stuff, and occasionally I'll sign up for stuff under my Facebook ID, and then I don't remember, or I can't get into my Facebook ID at the moment, and I actually box myself out occasionally. So there's so many single. It's like, what is the single sign-on? What is the single identity for everybody out there? And the truth is, there's not one.
Right. But it's also possible for our customers. In fact, one comes to mind where they could be coming in as a customer and just using local credentials, but they have actually shared their SSO with us, and they actually SSO into our instance. Yeah. So we support it. It's always a great idea, but it's hard to enforce it for all external customers. But again, this article is focusing a little bit more on the internal.
Well, I'm gonna actually jump on that and say this. We don't ever want to call them customers. I know you're calling them customers, not
clients.
Client partners. Like that, whoever that client is, we are so closely aligned with us that they've enabled their single sign-on, their identity provider to talk to us. That's a real client partner scenario right there. Fred, before we jump into the meat of the article, anything at a high level you want to talk about the general idea of why we brought this article, this blog?
Oh, I think we're covered. I think it's good. I think glad that Mike brought it forward because it's more technical, it's more awareness. I think it's more educational. And sometimes we have these to talk about, like I said, general. And there's a lot of talk about AI. I think every conversation right now seems to be AI. So this may be a breath of fresh air to talk about something a little bit different for a moment, because I know AI is everywhere. So to me, I think this is important. It's important to know what's coming. And anybody listening to this podcast that has a ServiceNow instance and hasn't thought about it, I mean, I would dare say there's going to be people that don't have single sign-on there and don't have it incorporated into their ServiceNow, so they're going to have to address it.
So I'm glad you said that because I don't think the article actually states it. If I had to ask you guys to give me a number, Mike, I'll go with you first. What percentage of ServiceNow customers do you think don't currently have multi-factor turned on by default?
I'd say it's very few internal don't have it. The question is the exceptions.
Yeah.
We use SSO ourselves, but sometimes we have some backdoor or IDs that are set up just in case SSO is down. We need to be able to get into the instance. This covers those edge cases.
So Mike, you think, can I ask a question?
Mike, did you give me a number? Like, what do you think
I didn't.
Yeah, what do you think it is? Just guess. Nobody's holding you accountable for it.
I'd say some of the unsophisticated are probably using AD versus SSO, so maybe upwards of 20%.
20% have it or 20% don't have it?
Don't, just because they might be like my first large position under ServiceNow was at a company where we weren't using SSO, we were using LDAP. It was syncing the LDAP when you were using LDAP credentials to log in rather than SSO.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you would think everybody uses SSO. In practice, is everybody? Maybe not.
Okay, Fred, before you ask your question, and I do want to make a comment after you answer, what do you think the number is?
I think the number's higher because I honestly think, I think definitely ServiceNow's enterprise type customers probably enforce it, have it, but I think there's a lot of, mid-market and smaller customers that don't, because I think a lot of people still don't take those actions and move it forward. I think the number is probably more like 35 to 40.
Yeah. And look, my uneducated guess based on all other systems that I'm around, I bet it's more like 70 that don't have true multi-factor enabled or multi-factor as part of a single sign-on approach. I bet there's still a lot of those LDAP shops, Mike, that still just hit Active Directory or whatever.
Well, Mike, think about it this way too. A lot of the first conversation we have with a lot of these customers, they're standing up their instance. They talk about LDAP and AD integration. Like AD integration is not the same, correct? That's the first integration they want to do. That's not talking about single sign-on or multi-factor.
Right. Nowadays, in the past, you had on-premise AD, and you could bring your users or your groups in. Nowadays, a lot of people are using Azure AD, where Azure is pushing those accounts in.
I wonder as ServiceNow goes further down the stack and works with smaller clients, I bet this problem continues to grow, even though they're addressing it with, say, like releases like this. I guess, oh, that's what I wanted to ask. Mike, does this release enforce the fact you have to use multi-factor and there's no way around it, or is it just by default turned on?
So it's going to be default turned on, and what they're going to do is in the first 90 days, for the first 30 days you are logged in, it's going to warn you, but allow you to log in normally. 30 days after your first login, then they're going to require it to have been set up. And then I expect that at the end of that 90 days, everybody's going to have to do it immediately.
Wow.
But it looks like they give you a lot of options, as you see right here, with how to set it up, and it's not hard to set those up. But I'm glad they're doing it, honestly. I mean, it's more security, but I guess we'll get into that in the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do this. Let's progress to here. The first section after the introduction, it says, how does MFA help? Mike, you want to just kind of address the general concept here?
I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Credentials can be lost, credentials can be stolen, credentials can be intercepted in between. You could accidentally put your credentials in as your password in as a credential, as your login ID in some system, and then somebody has it. This is that second factor to make sure you are who you say you are. Not just the fact you know the ID and password, but an additional authentication or verification.
You don't think people still put their like passwords on a Post-it note on their desk anymore, do you?
I think they do. I think they do for sure.
Yeah,
and they reuse it. But as I'll get into a little bit, some of these MFA methods are not super secure either. So a lot of traditional MFA is like, oh, send me a text message, but those text messages can be intercepted, and so they're definitely recommending use things like Google Authenticator or passkeys.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Let me just roll through the ones they list here. Passkeys is one. Authenticator apps such as Google or Microsoft Authenticator. Hardware security keys such as YubiKey. Biometrics, biometric authenticators. Face ID, Touch ID, Windows Hello. And then, of course, there's email and text, one-time passwords.
And the last one I would say is probably the least secure nowadays. And the security experts do not recommend that.
Right.
Oh.
For anything.
But let me ask a question about the biometrics, just because I'm curious about that. If you go back up, the biometrics, the Touch ID, face, that's all just based on that computer that you have, correct?
Well, right.
If you were somewhere else?
Right. So like if you were on your phone, because you can access ServiceNow through the phone, just as you log in with your thumbprint or the like, you could set it up so that is your second factor authentication. The fact that you've authenticated, confirmed yourself on that device would be that second factor. And with Windows Hello, that's where you log into Windows, it looks at your camera, it looks at your picture, it can do that second factor that way.
Yeah, I bring that up, Andy, because I think a lot of thought has to go into how people want to set this up, and that's why I said it. Because I mean, you look at the way we work these days. I mean, I've seen Andy go into a hotel, log into his VDI, and get to everything he wants to get to. If you have those type of biometrics set up, then I think you'd be limited in those spaces. And the way ServiceNow is set up in the cloud, yes, we can work from a mobile app or any PC as long as we can get to it.
Yeah. I'm just Googling now wow, I don't know, maybe it's literally been 20 years actually. There was a product that we were selling and demonstrating that was based on the speed at which you typed. So you had your password, and not only would it have your password, but it would measure and monitor the cadence at which you typed your password.
Right.
It would use that as a factor to determine if it was really you or not. Pretty cool. I don't know what happened to that technology. Maybe it just didn't prove to be viable or not, but it was one
Hmm.
way to do it. All right, Mike, wait a minute. Let me read the quote here. I usually do that. MFA significantly reduces the risk of unauthorized access, even if a password is compromised by up to 99%. I'm massive believer. I think XenTegra is somewhere in the approach of this of just eliminating passwords altogether and rely on a multi-factor solution or two in order to get people in. I hate passwords, and the company as a whole is not really, we don't use passwords anymore. We use passphrases, and that gets really hard for people. I really would like to just move to some type of
Yeah,
multi-factor.
yeah, and use of passphrase or passcode or password rather is still often your first entry in there. But then if you come back to the PC the next day, you don't have to re-enter that. You have your biometrics or your PIN or
Right.
what have you.
Yeah. This next section is titled "How Does MFA Affect ServiceNow Customers?" Mike, you want to hit that?
So this is where I mentioned the fact that during the first 90 days after the upgrade to Yokohama, all internal users, those are people without the external role of the SNC external, um, logging in with either local or LDAP credentials will need to set up an MFA within 30 days of their first login. So if you log in for the very first time on the 45th day of that 90 days, you'd have to do it in the next 30 days after your 45 days. You could still log in normally, but you'd have to do it in the next 30. If after that 90 days or after the 30 days after first login, you'll be forced to do the MFA setup. I think that a lot of people are at this point are fairly familiar with Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator. Pretty straightforward, but there are, as we just spoke, a number of other methods.
So, Fred, I would expect us to be getting lots of phone calls from people that aren't ready for this, that lower tier, maybe some small enterprises, large commercial. This is probably something to get with our security team on and maybe get the word out that if you're on the ServiceNow platform, you better be ready for this or need our help.
Right. And again, this is strictly internal focus. We said that it's internal users without the SNC external
Uh,
role. So if
yep.
you were like a client who was logging into your system to raise a ticket or something else, ServiceNow is not requiring that at this point. However, if you were a health system where people are logging in to verify your doctor's appointment or your details of your medical appointment, that is where you would want to consider enforcing an MFA for those external users. But today for Yokohama, internal is the focus.
So, Fred, I'm always thinking about it from a marketing perspective. I think it's a great opportunity to kind of get the word out and see if we can't find some clients that are on ServiceNow, don't have multi-factor, need help with multi-factor, the combination between our security team and you guys. Um, okay, Mike, next section says how to get started with MFA.
Um, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, read the documentation and set up your default. I mean, the Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator is the default. That is what you can do. But if you'd like to have some better conversations with us, we are absolutely here and willing and able to help you out. But if you're using SSO and you just need to also have MFA set up for some of those edge conditions, such as your backup admin account just in case you have to log in, or maybe some testing users, you're going to have to do this.
So, Mike, and just to be clear, right? I mean, nobody has to wait at this point, so they can set up MFA today, whatever
It
release
could,
they're on. Gotcha. So
right? Mhm.
this is
And
just making them aware that in that release. And to your point, Andy, I think us making sure we educate our current customer base and all the ones that we meet at events and stuff that we making sure they're aware of this, and we can also assist with their upgrades and making sure they have it handled.
The lunch I had today, we kind of talked a little bit about how ServiceNow historically has been all about, ServiceNow partners that basically focused on ServiceNow. And then the person I was meeting with, I said, yeah, that's changed though, because a lot of these ServiceNow partners are being acquired by these larger value-added resellers that do more than just ServiceNow. This is a great example of where you'd have an identity team within the partner like us that would fall under our security practice that needs to be in parallel, helping customers get ready for platforms that are going to need multi-factor. And in this case, literally start to require it, and there's no way around it.
100%.
All right, Mike, this is the one I've been kind of talking around. You've been answering. How can I disable this thing, multi-factor?
The answer is you shouldn't. I suppose it's possible. It absolutely is not recommended. That's the way you get these security breaches, allowing exceptions to good policy.
Yeah. Fred, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think it's the truth. I mean, I think it's time for these enforcements to start happening because we're still starting to see some security breaches. And so at some point you got to draw the line in the sand. And I'm glad to see them doing it and saying that this release, that's going to happen.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't.
And it's probably a good time to say this. I think the reason why some of this is happening, and Mike alluded to it, like get into a little bit of CSM or other things, ServiceNow historically, right? ITSM, focus internal IT. And yes, this is starting internal. I'm sure you'll see it start to go further out as well. Because I think, Mike, in our last company we were at, we had to do two-factor authentication to our customers as well, right? External to make sure they were safe. So, Andy, I think what you'll see is now that you're starting to see the platform being utilized as a platform across organization and across the different business units, you're bringing in a lot more different data. You actually security is brought into here. Your customer data is being brought into ServiceNow. So I think more and more this security is important, and I think you're seeing this release internal internal MFA being required. In the future, I bet you see it external as well.
So Fred, I'm actually going to take credit for bringing that up as a platform conversation because, and I'm sure Mike either said the same thing or would say the same thing. It's one thing when we're talking about a help desk tool or maybe ITSM, maybe kinda, but this thing is a platform they're running a big chunk of the business on if you're doing it right. We need to make sure we know who's coming in.
100%.
Mike, the last section here says, how should I prepare for enforced MFA? Going back to the conversation earlier, there should be most companies already doing this, but we know that's probably not true. My number was really high. Y'all's was somewhat high. Massive addressable customer base out there, client base that isn't prepared for this. What should people do?
Start now. Don't wait for Yokohama. There's no reason to say, hey, we only have to worry about it later. Set it up now. And if you're concerned about enforcing it right away, just as Yokohama says, you have the option for your first 30 days not to set it up. You could start that now, get people familiar, or speed it up as your security team best desires.
Yeah. I bet there's people out that wait till day 25.
Oh, for sure.
Try to figure it out. Fred, anything on the what to do now kind of message?
Well, I would just say if anybody wants any help with it or have that conversation, we're here and able to help. And like Andy said, I mean, we have a networking and security practice as well. That security practice can jump in and help all along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, we got the whole stack covered. I mean, I literally hesitate when people say, what do you guys do? And I literally have to hesitate and think to myself, is it okay to say we do it all? And then I say we pretty much do it all. And I can say that with a straight face as someone who knows what's going on over here. There's CEOs that work for much larger companies. They'll say it without hesitation, and I bet they don't really know.
Well, I work in one practice within this company, and I still say that when people ask me, what do you guys do? We can do it all. What do you need?
Yeah. Yeah. Fred, Mike, I appreciate the time today. Anything
Thank you.
Anything we didn't cover around this?
Nope. Just another shout out. If you're in the Charlotte area next week, come to the summit. So next Wednesday, 25th.
I would probably be remiss if I didn't bring up that it won't be long before the ServiceNow Knowledge Conference in May in Las Vegas is upon us. If you would like to go, reach out to your XenTegra folks and find out what it would take to get one of our deeply, deeply discounted passes. I expect us to either bring or influence 30 to 40 customers there this year, and we're going to make a big deal out of it.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right, guys. Appreciate the time. We'll talk next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.